Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sacramental Lens. This is what we call our show.
Yes, I heard.
And I have a very special guest today. His name is Dr. Mike Metzger. Mike, you and I met 2008-ish?
You know, I was trying to remember. I cannot recall.
I remember sitting down with you with our friend John Seal, who
Yes.
introduced us to each other. I think it was at a hotel near the Philadelphia airport.
Yeah, that's right.
2000. I'm guessing 2008.
Somewhere. Pre-COVID. It was just pre-COVID. There's BC and 80 or whatever.
It was way pre-COVID. But Mike has a very fascinating story that I still have not yet heard in depth. All I know is I got a call from him a few months ago saying he was coming into the Catholic Church. And when I met Mike in 2008, you had started the Clapham Institute maybe 6 years earlier.
Good memory.
And you were really helping to reframe a Christian conversation. Mm-hmm. And you're still founder and president of the Clapham Institute. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about that and that work. That's how you and I connected. You helped me as I was launching some new initiatives to get Theology of the Body out to the evangelical world and the Catholic world. But I always appreciated the way you framed the Christian conversation for a post-Christian world. I want to get into that, but I especially want to hear about your journey into the Catholic Church. You're going to be welcomed into full communion in just 2 weeks.
Well, I have to go through a third scrutiny this Sunday.
Oh, so maybe it's not going to happen.
I'm just...
But yeah, tell our audience, Mike, about your... How did you first encounter the Lord, your upbringing, your encounter with the Lord that then led you to become a Protestant minister? You founded a church, if I'm remembering, Annapolis Community...
Bay Area Community Church.
Bay Area Community Church. That was in the 80s, right?
1987.
And you were pastor of that church for how long?
8 years.
And then you branched out into consulting and...
Yeah, it's been a colorful career. Let's just put it that way. And
just jump in.
Probably when you're 68, you don't have 68 hours to... for me, I grew up in a very nominal Episcopal family. And then by the time I got to high school, I pretty much jettisoned that. And then when I went to college, I still recall... And by the way, I should preface all this to say, I knew early on, for some strange reason, I just think in pictures. So if I hear something, a picture pops. And so I've been tremendously helped by the work of Temple Grandin and her books and writing on it, because we all think in pictures, but a Western education snuffs that out. So all that to say, and when I went to college, I remember one night coming home from a rather late night party and smelling of beer and everything else, and I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, and a picture popped in my mind and said, a thought bubble saying, "You're going to hell." I remember thinking, what?
Like a thought bubble, like from a comic book kind of
and
thing.
Then I internalized. I said, "I'm going to hell," and I thought, "Well, what the hell?"
That'll wake you up.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Is this the 70s? I'm trying to do my math. You're 68, so you're in college in the 70s.
Yeah, this would be the spring of '73. I mean, winter. And I start to meet then students from InterVarsity, Navigators. They sold candy late at night. Believe it or not, I was playing football back then, so you get the munchies at 11:30. And I'd meet these guys at their candy shop in their dorm room, and they would always hand me tracts, and I'd go, but I eat the candy. I loved a good Milky Way bar at night. And then one day, a student staffer came in with Campus Crusade and shared the 4 laws, and it was like the lights went on. I said, "This is what it means to know Christ." And I prayed the prayer, and a picture came into my mind that I hadn't anticipated. Because I was expecting to hear in bright lights, "You are now forgiven." Mm-hmm. And the word that appeared was, and I don't share it with many people, it was perspective. And I said, and it was like a voice saying, "And now you're going to begin to get perspective." And I remember thinking, well, that was odd.
So this was a track of
the 4 laws.
Help us with the 4 laws.
4 laws is just simply 4 laws Bill Bright wrote. It's an encapsulation of the gospel in a Protestant evangelical understanding. And for me, it was where I felt that now I've come to faith. Whether or not I was before, whatever, all I knew is all of a sudden my language cleaned up. I had an interest in spiritual things. And so for the next 3 years, I was involved with Campus Crusade. And when I came to the end of college in 1976, I did have one moment of a bit of despair. I was halfway through college as a B.F. Skinner psychology major because I wanted to know what makes people tick. Why do they? And well, now I was writing papers I really didn't believe, like you have no soul and so on and so forth. So I quit playing ball. I switched out and I went back to my first loves, which were history and philosophy, and I got a double major in that. So I'm one of the last 6 remaining history majors on the face of the planet. And then when it came time for graduation, my father, and it's a long story with my father. My father was Phi Beta Kappa at the University of Michigan, PhD. And he was a bit crestfallen when it came to faith. He felt like, you're going to be a fine faculty member one day, as he was. And
what did your dad teach?
Industrial engineering. So I got none of his DNA. We used to look carefully at the postman every time he came just to try to figure out where my DNA. But it's a sweet story before he passed away, how we pulled closer. But I just remember he was very crestfallen because I said, Dad, I just want to change the world. And I'm going to join Campus Crusade for Christ. And I think he was embarrassed about that. And did that for 8 years, all on the Louisiana State University campus, because I came out of Western Michigan University. The weather was so terrible, I said, Lord, I'll serve you anywhere on the Gulf Coast or the West Coast. And so they sent me to the Gulf Coast. And I learned good at thinking on my feet. I was a leader. The ministry really blossomed. But when I came towards the end of the 8 years, I felt like I was a square peg in a round hole in that I found the way we were defining evangelism wasn't workable anywhere except in this tight confine. So went off to a seminary for 4 years. Finished up there, and then the key events were one of my favorite professors 2 years later, when I was in the midst of planting this church. I went to a conference and he spoke on conscience. And that will play in importantly into my conversion or coming into the Catholic Church, because I had never heard about conscience.
Interesting.
And I supposedly had a degree in systematic theology. And when he said the word appears 31 times in the New Testament, I went, I've never read it. And so it started for me actually 30 years ago now, kind of a lifelong quest to understand human conscience.
Fascinating.
And just so you know, sure enough, the best writers I could find were almost all Catholic.
What were some of those writers? Who were they?
Their names escape me right now, but I was actually going back to, if it wasn't Augustine, but there were some contemporary writers that, again, I can see the book, I can see the cover, but I just thought this is a more full-orbed understanding. So what happened in that is that I was a pastor for 8 years, enjoyed the first 5. We fired the staff for good reasons, and I just found this fragmentation that took place in my church of everyone had individualized takes on gospel, discipleship, and it really hit the fore. Now, that was roughly about the same time that I became aware of Thomas Howard entered the Catholic Church.
He was a big evangelical.
Very big. His brother was head of the Worldwide Evangelical Alliance, Brother David. His one of his relatives was Elizabeth Elliot. And so all of us are familiar with this whole family tree of evangelicals. Howard went to Wheaton College, which is sort of the flagship.
Yep.
And it was there that he began to have this a skepticism about his faith based upon he just found all these individualized takes and said, how can we ever be one? He eventually, when he finished college, he entered the Episcopal Church. And then he wrote a book in 85 that really unsettled a lot of us called Evangelical is Not Enough. And he entered the Roman Catholic Church.
Wow.
And it was, so there's a lot of us in seminary going, what? But I remember feeling, this guy's an intelligent guy. And he is the one who said, I've not become less evangelical, I've become more evangelical. The councils, the creeds, the magisterium. And I went, so I'm in the midst of we don't have any sort of plumb line. And he's saying this tradition, between this and Orthodox, about 2/3 of the worldwide communion does. And for him, it just sort of settled.
Right.
Of course, he was fired by Gordon College. And so that's part of my migration. But to speed the film up, when I resigned as a pastor, I eventually did end up in consulting. Amongst the many things I did, I used a lot of work on conscience to say, why do so many businesses sort of have this bifurcated, here's the real business, over here ethics, but we really don't pay attention to that. And I found that conscience the 4 types of conscience that are in the Bible, I just translated them. I depicted them in ways that were accessible to anyone. Wrote a book, very short one. And I get a call one day in Annapolis, and it's this woman I've never met. She goes, can we meet at City Dock Coffee? And we did. It's Karen Goodwin.
Oh, I remember Karen. Good woman.
Oh, my goodness. And she sits down. She's got a copy of the book. She goes, did you write this? Of course, you always feel like, why? I said, yeah. She said, it's very Catholic. She goes, are you Catholic? And I said, no. But then she began to unfold over the next few years this, what I would call this wondrously beautiful picture, not only of conscience, but work. It was really Catholic social teaching.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way, she and maybe John Seal had a part in meeting you.
That's right. Yeah, I remember meeting John Seal in 2007 or so. He came to a talk of mine in New England somewhere. He pulled me aside at the end of the day, talked about his experience with John Paul's teaching, told me he was not Catholic, and that, pricked my interest. He ended up driving me to the airport. He was telling me about some movie he was working on through Walden Media at the time, and I was really taken by this guy. And we stayed in touch, and then he said, you have to meet Mike Metzger, and you have to meet Karen Goodwin. I was fascinated by Karen's involvement. She was a producer with the Broadway Les Mis.
Les Mis, yes.
And I'm a huge, huge fan of Les Mis. And anybody who knows me knows I love Les Mis. I bring it out in my classes all the time. And so you and John and I and Karen formed a friendship. This is, 2010, 11 or so, that we were meeting on a fairly regular basis and talking about how to translate theology of the body for a wider culture. And I really appreciated the way you took gospel ideas and put them in a language that worked in in your business consulting. And that's the new evangelization, is finding ways to take the gospel and put it in a language that the modern world can receive and understand. This is so much part and parcel of what John Paul II's entire project was that I had given myself to. And you and John and Karen had an interest in what I was doing with John Paul II. I had an interest in what you were doing in translating the gospel for the wider culture.
Right.
So we came together to form just a little team of just meeting and consulting and finding a language. One of the great gifts you gave me, and I still use it to this day, is this idea of the frame, right? How did you say it? Like you can't solve a problem
using the same mind, the frame that created
the problem.
Right.
Unpack that a little bit. What does that mean?
Well, nothing original. That's basically a riff on Einstein. He said we can't solve our problems using the same mind or inside the same frame. And then it was really, if you're looking for a handy little book, readers, Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff, Lakoff, takes this and basically says, people think in frames. If you operate inside their frame, no matter what you say will get put in their frame and it'll fall apart. You've got to reframe. So you have to, and I view reframe as now I'm putting the same data, but I'm putting it in my ball field. And all of a sudden, when you lay everything out, people go, oh. And so what I began to find, Christopher, not only in work, I could regale you with all these stories of people who came to faith, and they would continually say, oh, well, that's Christianity. And even the simple the idea of creation, fall, redemption, and new creation or consummation, whatever you want to call it, I reframe that in a mug that we used in businesses, ought, is, can, will. And that one has had story after story after story of people saying, like these two movie producers from LA saying, "That really sings, man. It's got texture. Where'd you get that?"
Yeah. So unpack this. Ought is can will. Unpack that and connect it with creation, fall, redemption, consummation.
Yeah. This is fun. A good friend of mine, Dave, hired me to walk the shop floor of his company and said, "Listen, I've been introduced to this gospel of creation, fall, redemption, consummation, but nobody talks that way at work. Would you walk the shop floor and find a way we could translate this?" And it literally came to me in a picture one day. I was walking around. I said, so creation is, everyone imagines the way it ought to be, which is what actually C.S. Lewis said. The way it is, it's not. It's fallen.
Right.
Redemption is what God could do about it. And so we all have a DNA of...
things can be better.
Things can be better. And then...
which already presupposes we have a sense of what it's meant to be.
Obviously.
If we're saying things can be better, we already have a reference point.
That's right. And then eternity is a hope for what will be. And even Nietzsche said, eternity, all of us long for this. And so where I had fun with this is I said, I don't want to teach this. I want people to discover it. And so I came up with an exercise of a business situation that had fallen apart and asked everyone to put down every emotion they had, and then they would organize them on a big whiteboard. And I'd say, do these seem to be how they group? Like you say, they should have done this. And I'd say, that's kind of like we imagine the way it ought to be. And they go, yeah. And I'd say, and here's what we recognize the way it is, yeah. And then here's what we can do, yeah. And then here's what we hope will come out of it. And I said, ought is, can, will. This is your biology. Get this, your biology is built on only 4 nucleotides, your entire DNA, your biological DNA. I said, you have a behavioral DNA that's built on these 4 markers. And I saw so many people come to faith. And because their jaw was up, they go, and I'd say, because here's the trick with DNA. Are you aware of your DNA?
No.
And so it isn't something you apply to your life. That's what I wanted to get away from.
Right.
And I even saw this in a seminar I did one evening in China, in Beijing, for 41 scientists. And we went through this. And I know we're given to exaggeration as Christians. But they literally sat there for 45 minutes once they saw ought is, can, will, and they abandoned trying to speak in English. And at round tables like this, they began to chat so rapidly. And I finally asked my translator, I said, what are they saying? They're saying, they feel like ought is, can, will explains everything.
Kind of does.
Well, remember C.S. Lewis? I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun is risen early because I see it, but by it I see everything else.
Right.
And I sat there and just went. So that's, again, to speed the film up. The more that I worked in this, the more I felt in my bones, this is really a sacramental view of life. It's just no other way. You can't, it's all matter is imprinted by God. There's nothing to sacred, secular rest in. So I'm wrestling with this. And then second, I've been an adjunct faculty, a couple of fellows courses. And a lot of these younger people I've worked with, they've all come into the Catholic Church. They're kind of like Garrett's a good friend of mine. He won't mind me mentioning his name. He's out in Denver now. And he'll go, hey, Prof, what's the deal? And then...
what's the deal? Because you're sounding Catholic? Is it?
And I'm not Catholic.
And you're right.
And then particularly then, the more I fell in love with the best writers, the great fantasy, you just go, gosh, they're almost all Catholic. And then because I think in pictures, one of the most wondrously beautiful tradition, in my opinion, that really captures that is Roman Catholicism.
Yeah. So this show we call the
and of course your course is what rocked my world too.
Well, we'll get to that. But so we call the show the Sacramental Lens.
Yeah.
And I would like you, if you can, walk us through you're a Protestant evangelical. You've been affected.
Well,
not
I guess
just
2 more weeks.
Well, for 2 more weeks.
Okay.
In 2 weeks, you will be welcomed into full communion in the Catholic Church. And I think the key to understanding your journey is this sacramental aha, where you start seeing this is the way the world is made. It's made to reveal, everything is made to point to something beyond to the mystery, to the transcendent ultimate truth. And that transcendent ultimate truth entered this creation, took a body to reveal bodily his own mystery. That's sacramentality.
Yeah.
To see in the physical signs of the spiritual. And I love to ask my students this, so I'm going to ask you this, to get people into a sacramental way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first favorite song that you can remember? Maybe even 3 or 4 years old.
Oh, it's easy.
What is it?
It's Junior Walker and the All-Stars. What does it take to win your love for me? It has a saxophone riff that can't be beat.
Okay, this is great. So the fact that you said, "Oh, that's easy," it's already. I mean, it's so deeply embedded in you. You had that favorite song. I will give to my students as a homework assignment. I'll say, I want you to listen again to the first favorite song you can ever remember, and I want you to imagine whatever's attracting your heart, whatever's pulling at you. There's some reason that was your favorite song. And I want you to imagine maybe, and for most of them, it's the first time they've ever thought this way in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
that God himself was wooing you to his own heart through that song. Yeah. And that your appeal to that saxophone immediately strikes my heart as there was something in that saxophone, the sound of it, that went right into your heart and was pulling you towards something transcendent.
Yes.
Can you press into that a little bit?
Oh, easily. And where you've helped with the theology of the body is that even when I read about the Inklings, they wanted to enchant the world. Well, enchant is in song, in
enchant, of course.
And so I
Enchanted,
always
right,
loved
of course.
music. And again, not to pick on my father. My father's a great guy, but he'd go, "What is that song you're listening to?"
Yeah.
Because I would get the best headphones. I'd wear the needle out. I mean, my first album was Sly and the Family Stone, but the second one was George Harrison because of these 12-string guitars that are overlayered and dubbed, and I'm listening to this thing, and this is just, I'm going into another world. And, when I take them off, because I'm in high school at that time, I just remember thinking, I can never explain this to anyone.
Yeah.
And I like that Lewis even wrote, in a letter to a friend, and we really shouldn't try to explain them because we make them untruths if we explain them too much.
Right.
And
I once heard it said, trying to explain music is like trying to explain sex.
yeah,
Like it's better just to experience it.
it is. And so that really is what began to pull me to sacramentalism in this regard. Back to Audius Canwell, is that I was finding, I also often used to say, in the world that I came from, apologetics was a 100-pound backpack. Man, you had to know so much stuff.
Yeah.
That you had to hire the pros. And I said, I can give you a 4-pound knapsack that simply, it better accounts for the way people act when they're unedited. And so because of that, like these two filmmakers, now, they'd had a few IPAs when they came home that night when we lived in downtown Annapolis. But one of them, Zach, I love these guys to death. He takes the mug and he goes, "Where'd you get this, man? It's got texture. It sings." and I saw Kathy and I, we were tired. We were on the couch. And I said, normally I like to say, "You don't want to know." And I make them ask 3 times. But I said, "Listen, I'll cut to the chasing. It's the Apostles' Creed. It's a Nicene Creed. We're Christians." Well, we spent the next 15, 20 minutes. And in the end, he goes, and I can't use the word he used, but he goes, "This is the most beautiful MF in Christianity I've ever heard of." And, we're friends to this day.
Oh,
in fact,
beautiful.
they asked me, the other one asked me, he said, "Hey, would you be not a believer, but he said, would you be my spiritual director?" And it just, I was driving back to the airport and he just began to pour out his heart. And so, these Chinese scientists with, the other fascinating thing is when after I went through Theology of the Body, I came back and I began to rewrite how I did premarital. Because, Kathy and I had done a lot of premarital, 8 years as a pastor. And I think I married like 200 people and buried one. And I remember that, especially when COVID hit, there was this couple, they were in Charlottesville, so we couldn't get together. She had been on Crusade staff, and I forget where he came from. He's a med student. And so this kind of it was more to paint the most wondrously beautiful picture of why you have a body. But it moves toward Bible, but it starts with the way you behave. And I'll never forget, we got on the Zoom with, I can't remember her name, I think it was Rachel, but with Jackson was his name. I like that name, Jackson. But he gets on, he's teary. And I say, hey, what's up, Jackson? He goes, and all I could say was emotion. He said, I've never met anything so beautiful.
Wow.
And makes me tear up thinking about it now. He was just, and I said, that's what I feel called to. I've always been an intuitive thinker. That has some upsides, but it has a downside.
Right, right.
The downside is you can smile and be missing many teeth. You know, you don't have all the data, Phil.
Right.
And part of my draw into the Catholic Church is more and more I go, I think I'm intuitively close to it. I wonder what the Catholic Catechism says. And I go, oh, wow, that says a lot better than I ever could say it. And it was filling in.
Yeah.
And the more it filled in, the more I said, well, why in heaven's name don't I just enter?
And when did that come to you? Like, why in heaven's name do I not just enter the Catholic Church?
Really, it was when Kathy and I were in Florida in February.
You and Kathy been married
42 years this summer.
42 years.
Yeah. And we were on vacation with Pat and Jennifer and their kids, and we had a place. And maybe it was just the setting, Longboat Key in February. Maybe that's how God does it.
That was sacramental wooing yet again.
I don't think it would ever happen in Maryland.
No, Mike, your intuitive sense, your thinking in pictures, your love of that saxophone when you were a little kid.
Yeah.
All of these, I would argue, and I'm sure you would agree, are seeds that are planted in your being that are flowering in bringing you into the church.
That's right. Along
the way, that sacramental sensibility, encountering the Creator in His creation, led you to John Paul II's Theology of the Body. I remember being in that zone with you, but I don't remember how you first encountered the Theology of the Body. Tell that story.
Through you.
Okay.
Yeah, we were meeting some, but you had, right here at Black Rock, we had a 5-day immersion. And
do you remember what year that was that you came?
No. I just remember you didn't have a beard and you looked a lot younger.
You probably didn't have any gray hair. Yeah.
And it was just. I'll tell you what was a moving moment in it is I think there were over 200.
Probably like 125 is where we max out. But.
Yeah. So I met some women who were, and you have to give me the right word, but they were chaste. For life. What would they be called?
The consecrated women.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But one was, very attractive, sharp businesswoman. I remember thinking, oh, what a shame. And the third day in, I sought her out. I was crying. I said, I need you to forgive us. I said, I really thought you were missing out. I had no idea the beauty of what you're doing. And she was very generous. And but that's what I came away from those 5 days. And I'll tell you, what I've had repeatedly the feeling of, I feel at home. Then we met Andreas through your work. Mm-hmm. Can't think of his last name right now. He wrote The Pope and CEO.
Oh, yes. Can't think of his last name.
And several years later, he's part of founding the Bush Business School at Catholic University of America. And so I was there for the opening. And I have been teaching Catholic social teaching. Well, I've been embedding it in my business consulting without saying Catholic social teaching. Right. I've actually been putting it in brain science, which is a whole nother fascinating thing. And but I was there for the opening of the school and the day's festivities, and I remember thinking, I came home and I told Kathy, I said, that's my home. That's how I think. When I think of business, when I think of, it's like, and I mean no disrespect, I love what the Lord has privileged me to be a part of, and I so much appreciate my evangelical background. But I do feel like I'm more evangelical than I ever have been in the ancient sense of the word. And so faith and work now looks like this versus Catholic social teaching has all that, and it is an integral ecology, as Pope Francis puts it. The whole thing is seamless. Well, I've been doing these exercises for years with younger Christians about the seamlessness of all this, and I go, well, this does it a whole lot better than I would say it. So I've been intuitively feeling it. And I think, well, also sometimes if you just get away, you get out of the daily amount of work. And so when we were in Florida, we had, a lot of time just to do nothing.
Yeah.
But of course, there's no such thing as nothing then going on. The Lord is at work. And I just felt the Lord just said, come on home.
I want to press into those few days where you came into this course. It was probably 12 years ago or more. You came to the course. You saw this consecrated woman who given herself entirely to Christ as a consecrated celibate. Mm-hmm. And initially you think, oh, she's missing out.
Yeah. I really felt like poor gal.
Poor gal, she's missing out.
Condescending would be the right word.
And a few days later, you're seeing the beauty of her total bodily gift to Christ the bridegroom. What happened to get you from that condescending, oh, you're missing out, to in tears asking her forgiveness?
Well, you may or may not recall, you brought the 12 or 15 and had them up there.
So I always bring the consecrated people, the celibates, up into the front of the room, and I say, everybody look at their bodies. Their bodies are telling us a story.
That didn't help me at all. That was
Their bodies are not saying sex is bad. They're saying sex is a pointer to something far greater, right? Mm-hmm. Celibacy is not a rejection of God's plan for sexuality. Celibacy, I don't even like that we call it celibacy because it puts it in the negative.
Yeah.
It tells us what they're not doing. But if we were to put that in the positive, they have embraced, even here and now, the eternal marriage, the eternal nuptials. And one of my favorite examples of this is St. Teresa of Avila.
Yes.
There's a famous artwork, a famous statue called Teresa of Avila in Ecstasy by Bernini. It's one of the masterpieces of sacred art in 2,000 years of history of sacred art in the Christian tradition. And she's in this place of total surrender. And I show this image at my seminars often. And I once had a woman say, you shouldn't be showing that. That's pornographic. And I was like, oh, no. Pornography is the diabolic mockery of that surrender to God. Yeah. She had the whole thing backwards. And the point, there was a modern Carmelite in the whole tradition of Teresa of Avila who was giving a talk at a secular university about her life as a religious woman. And she was trying to share with this audience that she experienced what the mystics call, and Teresa of Avila, her tradition, calls nuptial union with love eternal. That's that ecstasy. And this agnostic psychologist comes up to her after her talk and says, you're sick. What you really want is sex. But you're disguising your desire for sex with all this ridiculous talk about union with God. And she was so spot on in her response. She said, oh, no. I beg to differ. What the world really wants is union with God. But it's disguising that desire with all this ridiculous, promiscuous sex. Yeah. And you're like, okay, who? This is a challenge to the paradigm of get it now, here it is, what I call the fast food approach to fulfillment. It tastes good going down, but if that's your steady diet, the grease and the sodium is going to kill you. Yeah. We're all hungry for something. The Christianity that I was raised with was kind of a starvation diet. You know, your desires are suspect, if not outright bad. Repress that. Follow these rules. Well, if those are the only two choices, the fast food or repression and follow the rules, I'm going for the fast food because I'm hungry. But I discovered when I first read JP2's Theology of the Body that Christianity is an invitation to a wedding feast, a banquet of infinite love that truly corresponds to the hunger of the heart. I look at the world, things are not the way they ought to be. My own experience, I was in so much pain from a sexually promiscuous life. I knew this is not the way it ought to be. I believe it's not the way it is, isn't the way it ought to be. I came to believe there is a way out, This can change, and will. There is a fulfillment that will come. That's what I learned from JP2.
Yeah.
And to come to realize, oh my gosh, this is what Christianity is. This is what Christianity offers. The answer to the deepest soul-wrenching yearning of my soul that got awakened as a boy when I heard Bruce Springsteen on the radio. What? When I was sitting in the movie theater in 1977, June of 1977, rocked my world. I was almost 8 years old, perfect age for Star Wars. I'm sitting in the dark theater. All of a sudden, and my heart, I mean, George Lucas took me on a ride. Sylvester Stallone with his Rocky movies took me in a journey into my own soul. The Rocky music, like, awakened something in my little boy's soul that grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let me go. And years later, this is kind of a fun little bookend to my love of Rocky. And all of this is to say, it's the invitation to view the world through the sacramental lens. Why did that Star Wars story speak to my heart? Why did the Rocky music capture my soul? Years later, like, I don't know, well, it was the 40th anniversary of Rocky. So it was 2016, and my mom had bought me this big DVD set with all the behind-the-scenes interviews of Rocky, and Bill Conti,
oh yeah,
who wrote the Rocky theme song.
Eye of the Tiger.
No, that was Rocky 3. That was later. But the whole ba 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 da da ba da da ba da ba 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 da da, you know, the Rocky theme that everybody knows. Bill Conti wrote it, and in these behind the scenes footage, he's being interviewed, and he says what inspired him with the Rocky theme. He says, I know it'll surprise you, but it was the nobility of the sacrifice of the Mass.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, nor did I.
Wow.
He said, now, what's going on? People are in the ring punching and getting bloodied, and what I'm thinking of as I'm writing that music is death and resurrection, the nobility of the sacrifice of the Mass. Now, and then he goes, it's none of your business what I'm thinking of when I'm writing music, but if it touched you, if it spoke to you, if it reached you, then it worked. And I'm thinking, did it touch me? Did it reach me? Did it work? Holy yeah. Mm-hmm. It worked. This is the power of a sacramental way of seeing the world. Everything becomes a means of allowing the deepest places of our hearts to be touched, to be awakened, to be, thank you for giving me the etymology, enchanted. To be enchanted. That's, if Christ does not enchant you, it ain't Christ. It's some false Jesus. It's some false gospel. If the gospel is not enchanting you, awakening and stirring those deepest places and giving you hope of the fulfillment, things aren't the way they ought to be. The way they are isn't the way they ought to be. They can be better, and they will be. And that trajectory of fulfillment of the yearning is real, and that's called hope. To believe that your desires can and will be fulfilled is called hope, and that's what saves us. Sorry, I went on a little...
No, you asked. That's...
I don't even know how I went down that trail.
Well, we're talking about, again, the women
Oh yeah, the women religious, and
what
you're
were they called?
they're called
order?
consecrated.
Consecrated.
Consecrated
For some
women.
reason, I always want to say chaste, and that's not it.
Yeah, we're all called to be chaste,
Yeah,
one way
I
or
was
the
gonna
other.
say,
But
consecrate.
consecrate, that means they give themselves
Yeah.
whole and entire to Christ the bridegroom here and now. That's
Yeah.
right. We were talking about Teresa of Avila. We're talking about that modern Carmelite. What people really
Right.
want is union with God. So we were talking about that point of conversion in your own heart, of seeing the beauty
Yeah.
of her relationship with Jesus. I think there's gold in there. I think that was a turning point for you. I think that was an aha moment.
I think so, and it comes back to because it's good to be reminded of all the things you were saying up there. And while that was happening, you're familiar with they will heap coals upon your head.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening to me. And so that is again a picture. It's not unlike Nebuchadnezzar came to his senses. The prodigal son came to his senses. It's these, you get hot coals heaped on your head, and those things burn until you get cleansed from them. So we are saved fire to fire.
Woo!
And so I just had to seek her out, which wasn't hard. There wasn't that many people there.
Right.
And come clean. No explanation, no, hey, I'm sort of, one thing I did, what I appreciate about Campus Crusade, they did a great job of teaching you how to confess. So we turned it into, don't be a Jedi Knight. A Jedi Knight, J-E-D-I. If you justify, explain, or defend what I do,
Justify, explain,
that's not confession.
defend. Okay, right.
That's
right.
making an apology.
Right.
And I said, the Bible says, never apologize. That's called apologetics. You're not giving reasons for why you sinned. If you give reasons for why you sinned, you're justifying it. We were taught, homologeo, say the same thing as God. I joke with people, I say, God has never said to me, hey, go tell Kathy, you're tired, she hasn't been very patient with you, she could do better, and you're doing the best you can. And that's your confession. So when we raised our kids, we really prayed consistently one thing. We stole from Augustine. They would grow up to love the things God loves in the order in which he loves them. And then second, we taught them confess. So our kids who often come, they had a big fight. And we say, well, Mark, and if he says something like, I'm sorry, we say, no, start again, you're not sorry. I confess to you, Stephen, I did X, Y, Z. And then Stephen had to say, because you never hear from God, it's okay.
Right.
Forget it.
Right.
We said, first of all, don't apologize because you're not sorry. And don't say forget it because you won't. And so we said, you have to hear you're forgiven from the other, which, for Kathy and I one night, we were up to like 3 a.m. It was one of us it was either me or her, but we just said, I know I'm supposed to, but I don't want to do it right now. So we said, well, we're just going to stay up till we get to that point.
Oh.
And then, so we were at the beach one time, and Mark and Stephen had some kind of fight. They came out and they said, well, we resolved it. And I said, what happened? They said, we're not going to talk to each other ever again. I said, back in the room. Because they knew they're going to ask, did you confess? And so I just, because I had that background, I knew that my conscience was either going to, be, Paul said in this stunning phrase, I live my whole life with a clear conscience. Because that doesn't mean you're always right. It means you make things right when you find out you're wrong.
Yeah.
And as Chesterton said, essentially, don't look for a religion that says everything you say is right. Find it where it points out where you're wrong. And, but it was you Lord using you to heap coals on my head while you went on and on about how wonderful these were. All right, I get the point. I will come clean, Lord.
But it's the reason I think that's such an important turning point for you is because there is a constant temptation to idolize the good things of this world. And one of the best things of this world is the sexual embrace. Mm-hmm. It's one of the, it's a transcendent reality. But unfortunately, we don't often ride the wave to its transcendent destiny. We want to grasp hold of it. We want it to be more than it possibly can be. Mm-hmm. And the consecrated celibate vocation is the declaration, not that sex is bad, but that it's not the ultimate good. It's a sign that points us to the ultimate good.
Yeah.
And in that way, it saves us from a hellish idolatry. And I think the state of the sexual revolution right now in our culture, it's playing out the truth that we will eventually despise whatever we idolize. The sexual revolution began with the promise that sex would be your ultimate fulfillment. It would give you what you're really looking for. It would satisfy that hunger. It would ease that ache. It would be what you're really looking for. And whenever you invest in something and a fulfillment that it cannot grant you, you'll eventually be really pissed at it that it didn't grant you the fulfillment you invested in it. Mm-hmm. And that's why we ultimately will despise whatever we idolize. And this, I mean, I don't want to go down this trail, but the gender reassignment surgery, what a nice way to put it. What it really is bodily mutilation. Yeah. It's a I hate that I have breasts and I will chop them off. I hate that I have a penis. I will chop it off. It is a violent hatred of God-given bodiliness.
The image and likeness.
Yeah, it's an all-out attack against the image and likeness of God in us. So the point is, consecrated celibacy, seen rightly, which is the key, seen rightly, is saving us from that idolatry. And it's recognizing, how did you say it earlier? You said something about putting your ideas in right order or something. How did you say it? Do you remember that point you're making about aligning your thinking with the way reality is? I'll just put it that way. And when we align our thinking with the way reality is, we discover the sacramental worldview. That the things of this world point us to a destiny. And when we mistakenly think the things of this world are our destiny, that's when we idolize them. The consecrated vocation is saying, this is beautiful, but it's not the ultimate thing you're looking for. See it as a sign, see it sacramentally, and it'll launch you in this direction. There's something more. You're made for more. There's another reality. C.S. Lewis, if you find in yourself desires that nothing in this world can satisfy, then it only makes logical sense you're made for another world.
That's right.
So your sacramental intuition from the earliest of ages, seeing the world in images and pictures, your love of music, your love of...
by the way, I'll throw in perhaps better music because I'm older. So I was around, 69 is considered to be the best year for music.
Well, 69 was the year I was born.
But I'm just telling you, if you want some really awesome, if you want to have another YouTube on that.
on the music of 1969.
Oh my gosh.
All right, maybe we have to have you back and just do an episode on the music of 1969.
I think it's on Amazon Prime. Anyone interested? Canyon Road. It's 2 episodes. It's all these groups that came together in L.A. and they ended up living up Canyon Road.
I'm writing it down.
And it is how the whole rock scene. David Crosby and Graham Nash come. They split up the Yardbirds.
I think I may have seen this.
Oh my gosh, it is so good. But you know why? The reason I mentioned it, first of all, it's just 2 years away from Summer of Love, but this is all about. So you read how quickly it evaporated by 1970, and then all the lies that are broken up. And I often call it, especially with women, perhaps with the men, I don't know. It's their eyes are dulled over.
Yeah.
And that has something to do with the body. It has something to do with how it was supposed to be free love. And, it has some really great music. But, it's just, so you mentioned it in one of yours once before, I think even at Theology of the Body, but, we're all singing with Stephen Stills and Love the You Can't Be the One You Love.
Yeah, love the one you're with.
Then they were doing that up and down Canyon Road. But the lives just end up in wanton misery. Yeah.
Yeah, I've often said that rock and roll was the soundtrack of the sexual revolution. Mm-hmm. And if you untwist what got twisted up in the sexual revolution, untwist that, you have the sacramental vision. The sexual revolution, in many ways, was a knee-jerk reaction against an anti-sacramental view, the puritanical, fearful rejection of the body. The sexual revolution is saying, don't throw that away. Don't tell me that's bad. There's something awesome here. Yep, there is. There is something awesome here. But the correction to the sexual revolution is don't absolutize that awesomeness. See it sacramentally as a sign that will lead you to what is absolute. And I often say JP2's Theology of the Body is saying to the sexual revolution, you want to talk about sex? Okay, let's talk about sex. But don't stop at the surface of it. Press into what Scripture calls the great mystery of the two becoming one flesh, the great mystery. I love the ring of the Greek. Paul says the mega mysterion, the mega mystery. Sex is mega, right? It is, in what sense? In the sacramental sense that this is a sign that points us to something beyond. This is a mega mysterion, a mega mystery, and it refers to Christ and His church, which you are entering into full communion in a few weeks, assuming you pass this next scrutiny.
Third and final.
Where there, I want to go through just in closing here. Were there big obstacles, like evangelicals looking at Catholicism usually run into Mary as an obstacle, purgatory as an obstacle, some the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist an obstacle, praying with the saints as an obstacle. Were there any of these typical Catholic obstacles? Were they obstacles for you? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, no, not really. Well, I mean, way back. One of the authors I've always appreciated is Rodney Stark, wrote Rise of Christianity and what have you. So he wrote a book that probably hasn't resonated or hasn't sold as well. He's a Protestant evangelical. He teaches at Baylor, and his book's called Bearing False Witness. It's 500 years of the Catholic faith being misrepresented by Protestants. So,
written by a Protestant, as a Protestant, about how Protestants have misrepresented.
Called How They've Broken the Ninth Commandment.
Oh, and tell me the title.
Bearing False Witness.
Because I need to know that one. Bearing False Witness.
So I recognized in reading that, first of all, I said, well, I don't think my Protestant evangelical friends are going to read this. Second, I told my family when I wrote them a note about that I'm entering the church, I said, a bad example makes bad law. So you can look at maybe an accident on the road and say, see, no one should be driving. And you go, that's a bad example. What's the good example? Well, the good example, I could be with you here today. I said most people that I know, my friends in the Protestant evangelical, are turned off by bad examples,
right,
or misrepresent. So they actually haven't looked into any of these things. I have, but I share Thomas Howard's view when he entered the Catholic Church. He said, some of these things are wrapped up in mystery. Somewhere along the way, you just have to say, people who are a whole lot smarter than me, who have been gifted by God to think these things through for 2,000 years, I want the church to be one, and I'm going to enter this so that we might fulfill, may they be one. And then he said, and I'm not going to become a proselytizer for the Catholic Church. He actually won a lot of students by just sharing this this wondrously beautiful story, this enchanting story. Which, by the way, do you know, part of why Lewis came to faith the day before, he had that dinner conversation in September 1931 with Hugo Dyson and Token, both active Catholics.
Yeah.
And what he was wrestling with is this, he'd been raised, nature, capital S. And so he's saying, I'm a scholar of medieval. I find it wondrous, but we know it's all lies and worthless. And Token says, no, they're not lies. And he and Dyson gave this sacramental view, and he said, he closed with, the stars are bursting with eternal music.
Glory.
The day later, Lewis comes to faith. Because it was the music of the spheres. He was enchanted.
He was enchanted.
And so in the same way, Chesterton was led into the Church of England by his wife, but he found the enchantment was even greater and deeper and more wondrous, but he had to recognize he'd written it off because of bad examples and misrepresentations, which an honest person doesn't do that. And so for me, I look at all the issues you mentioned, and I said, I sent to one of my friends, I said, let's not lose the big picture here. The big picture here is this is the most wondrously beautiful telling of the gospel, period. Now, these things over here, good people have fought over them. I simply yield. If I have I have many faults, but one would be, I don't want to be perceived. I'm the smartest guy in the world. I can answer all of those. I can solve every question you have and convince you in every way. I'm not interested in doing that. Along the way, I think the mystery of the human heart for me is this is very, very fresh with a lot of my friends. The mystery of the human heart is, I was taught, and I think it's true, that eternity, everyone's cup of joy will be full, but some cups will be larger than others.
Right.
I don't know the mystery of why some people, they get a thimble full, they're saved, and then they just repeat these lines for the rest of their lives because they know they're going to heaven. If I've had one of my major failings is somehow I thought I could persuade people there's a bigger cup. And I told my daughter, she's my sponsor, Jennifer, and I said, I'm not bringing any gifts or talents or anything. I'm bringing my sin, my vanity, my wanting to prove things, that the Lord began to break, especially before my father passed away. You know, believe it or not, I gave him a great book, The Metaphysical Club, by Louis Menand, Harvard. And he talks about the world that was created in the 1800s where you have faith and facts. And now they came, the University of Michigan is one of those schools called positivism. It's a whole lengthy thing. But at least my father said, that was very helpful, Mike, because it's true. When you came to faith and you said you were going to work here, I said, the soft sciences. It is a type of knowledge, that's the Latin word, science, but it's not real stuff.
Right.
And that's a damn shame, because you got a mind, but you're going to spend it on, it's not really real. And he said, I respect what you made of your life.
Wow, this was before he, obviously.
Before he passed.
Wow, beautiful. And I wanted to actually revisit that, because when you said that about your dad early on, I thought, I hope that comes back around. And I'm very glad it did. So he got to a place in seeing the fruit of your life and the way you spent your life, of being able to honor that.
Yeah,
he
died. Respected it. He was a very private man, that kind of that generation. But between that and going through some Harvard professor's immersion, as powerful as yours is, but a whole different thing on brain science. He too, he's a pretty far left Christian, but he does a debrief afterward. And I went through his course like in 2000. And he said, Mike, I know what you do with pictures whenever you work, and I'm here to tell you, you're intuitively onto it, but you've never been acquainted with the academic brain research behind why what you're saying is you're onto it. And he said, so tell me about your father. And I told him, and like 20 minutes into it, I'm bawling my eyes out. Oh. And he was very old. David Burnham is his name. And David said, I'm going to give you your father's blessing. He said, you have nothing to prove. You're intuitively onto it with the body, with all this. But you don't have to prove it to anybody. I would say, for me, entering the Catholic Church is a peacefulness. It is a rest. It is an ease from the dis-ease of me trying to persuade my friends, this is wondrously beautiful. It's wondrously beautiful.
Mike, what would you say in closing if we have any viewers out there who maybe are wrestling with a certain attraction to the Catholic Church, hesitation, fear? What would you say to them?
Well, a friend of mine, one of my former students in a fellows course, he put me onto Joseph Pieper's book, Leisure. And I read just the first few pages, and then I read the first few pages of The Catholic Imagination by Father, go West young man, who is that? Greeley. So Father Greeley, he's passed away. Read the first few pages of those two. So the first one is this. Pieper talks about life is not about figuring things out. It is about opening. It's contemplation. And I imagine, of course, as a bride opens her body to be penetrated. And I began to stop trying to go to a text to observe it and figure out what it says. And as I began to practice silence, solitude, fasting, and contemplation, things began to happen. And in the same way that over in the Catholic Imagination, just the first few pages, because he talks about Catholics inhabit an enchanted world. And he says, he had a good joke, by the way. He wrote like 93 romance novels, and there was always nuptial union, but
right.
Male, female, married.
Yep.
And they ask him, why do you write all these novels? He goes, I'm a priest. What am I supposed to do? And, but he just says, and I think he's right. He goes, Protestants generally they're reluctant to go that far. And you said this, and it stuck with me from the Theology of the Body. It's not that we go too far. We don't go far enough.
Yeah.
We don't go far enough.
Yeah, it's not that the world overvalues sex. It way undervalues. It doesn't know how valuable it is.
And so that would be my urging is perfect love casts out fear. If we really saw our bodies as bearing the image of this perfect love, we could go all the way in without fear. And I have done that with students, because it goes back to the woman I confessed to say, this is why Paul said, it's not visible to everyone who you truly are. But when he comes, who you truly are will be revealed. And so I say to my friends, because one says, I'm not married. And I go, you've not yet learned Colossians. You are married. Mm-hmm. And when he comes, we will all be the bride.
Amen.
We're already betrothed.
Amen.
Well, see, to my friends, I guess my appeal would be, if you don't find that wondrously beautiful, I'm not sure what I could say.
Mike, it has been, shall I say, enchanting. Truly.
Perhaps we'll have a rock and roll YouTube after this.
I look forward to that. I invite all of our viewers, follow the whole way, whatever enchants you. Follow it. Follow it the whole way, and it'll take you into the most beautiful song, the most enchanting song. If you have anything you want to share in the comments, please do. If you want to learn more about the theology of the body and the work of the TOB Institute, check out the link in the description, TOB for free. And we will send you 3 free sessions of our introductory Theology of the Body course, the one that Mike took years ago that blessed him so much. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Mike, for enchanting us.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always good to see you.
Thanks, brother.